Okay, so discipleship is this intentional one-on-one relationship. Now let's talk about during this intentional one-on-one relationship, what are some tools? How do we do discipleship? How does discipleship play out in our lives in our relationship with our students? The first tool of discipleship and the most important tool of discipleship is time. It is time spent with our students. We look at the life of Jesus, and Jesus is our model for discipleship. He was a pro at it, right? He had the 12 disciples, right? That's what he did for a living, is he brought these guys, he taught them who he was, he taught them who God was, and then he sent them out to make more disciples. He was the ultimate discipler, right? And so he, as our model, we take a look. What happened? He lived with them for 3 years, day in, day out. A ton of time in a group, but we know there had to be a ton of one-on-one interaction with Jesus and the disciples, with Jesus one-on-one with Peter, going, dude, Peter, what's going on? We see little glimpses of conversations with Jesus with Peter, going, Peter, this is happening. This is you and I connecting. This is time spent, you and me, you watching me, you seeing how I live, you seeing how I play out my relationship with God, and you getting a chance to then imitate that. Just like Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 11, he said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ, right? He started hanging out with these people, hanging out with them enough to where he could say something like that. He could say, guys, copy me as I copy Jesus. Like that's the plan. You're following me, I'm following Jesus, and which means you're following Jesus, right? That's what it ends up looking like. So he said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. We need to spend as much time with our students as we possibly can. It's not enough just to say, I'm going to give you a couple hours on Thursday, maybe an hour on Sunday morning, and that's going to be it. That's how you're going to learn who Jesus is from me. There needs to be, when we decide I'm going to disciple this student, there needs to be extra time. There needs to be some one-on-one time, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever you can fit into your crazy life schedule. But when we make a commitment, this is, I'm going to disciple a student, it looks like time spent with that student. And as we're spending time with that student, as we're learning about their life, we're learning about who they are, we're learning about what's happening in their life, then we bring in the second tool of discipleship, which is called accountability. Accountability, it's my job as a discipler to hold my student accountable. It's my job as a discipler to find out what my student's struggling with, where my student is hindered, is breaking down in the relationship with Christ, and then to come in and hold them accountable and work to bring them closer. We see Jesus doing this with Peter. There's that time when Peter comes up to Jesus and he's like, no, you shouldn't go to the cross, you shouldn't die, in Mark chapter 8 verse 33. And Jesus turns and he looks at Peter. He's already had this solid relationship with Peter, and so it's not like the first day they met he was just like, boom, Peter, you're horrible. But no, at this point they had this long-standing relationship. He'd spent a bunch of time with him, and he turns and he looks at Peter and he says, get behind me, Satan, right? For you are not setting your mind on things of God, but on the things of man. He says, you're messing up right now, and you need to get right. You need to get this fixed, right? All the time in Paul's writings, we see him over and over and over again as he's talking to people who he's been discipling, who he's been teaching, who he's been growing. We see him over and over and over again tell them, you've got to stop sinning. You've got to stop doing that. You've got to stop doing that. Read through 1 Corinthians. It's a letter where it's just like boom, 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 boom. Here's all the things you're doing wrong. Like, you're doing some things right. Good job. Here's the things you're doing wrong. Like, let's fix them. Let's get them fixed in our life. And so as we build relationship with students, then we can find out what they're struggling with, and we can begin to hold them accountable to their struggles. I'll never forget, I was doing marriage counseling with a guy that I really respected, right? Him and his wife, his name was Dave, and I'm doing marriage counseling with him one day, and my wife and I are sitting there, and we're going through this book together, and he's discipling us. That's what they're doing. They're discipling us on how to have a good marriage, and this book talks about tithing, and I was this young punk kid, it's just started my kind of career as a youth pastor, and I said to him, hey, I'm reading through the scripture and I'm seeing Paul, and Paul's like going around doing this stuff, and all these people are kind of tithing. They're giving money to the church for the support of Paul, and you don't see Paul kind of giving money back. It doesn't really make sense. They're giving him money. Why would he turn around and give it right back to them? It doesn't make sense. And so I'm not sure that pastors need to tithe. I don't think I need to tithe. And I will never forget, Dave's face kind of changed, and he kind of looked at me, and he kind of did this thing where he rebuked me. He rebuked me. He said, how could you? How could you decide that you're so much better than everyone else just because you're a pastor? That you don't have to give when everyone else has to give? What kind of a weak faith is that? And he just started laying me out, man, laying me out through the scripture, going, look, this is what the scripture says. If you're going to be obedient to the scripture, this is what you need to do. And I cannot begin to describe the change that went over in my heart as I thought about that over the next day or two, and I've been tithing ever since. Okay, that was a moment of rebuke that came from someone who's discipling me, that changed the way that I responded to Christ and changed the way that I give for the rest of my life. All because he had the courage, he had the strength to use the relationship that we had to hold me accountable. So, time spent, accountability, and finally, and also just as important as accountability, really helps accountability to be stronger, is encouragement. The final tool we're going to go over today is encouragement. Jesus was constantly teaching and encouraging his disciples to growth. Right? He was constantly pushing them a little farther. He was constantly going, okay, guys, like, let's go out, let's go teach, let's go do this, let's go do that. You know, he like walks on the water, and Peter's like, dude, can I do that? And Jesus is like, come on out, man, let's do this. You know, he was constantly lifting up his disciples. He was constantly encouraging them and pushing them and driving them and saying, let's get closer to Jesus. Great job doing what you're doing. Now let's push closer to Jesus. You know, 80-90% of the reason that I am a youth pastor today is because when I was in high school, I had a youth pastor who encouraged me to share my faith in front of a bunch of kids at a camp one day. And he was like, Nick, I think you can do this. I think that you might be called to do this. And so I did it. And from that day forward, I understood this is what God's called me to do. And if he had not encouraged me to do that, then I wouldn't have stepped up there, and I wouldn't have learned that God was calling me to do this for the rest of my life. Encouragement, absolutely essential. We have to encourage our students to growth. Encourage our students when they're doing well, when things are happening, when the relationship with Jesus is just meshing. We see it in their lives. We got to step in there and tell them how amazing it is. Tell them how incredible it is. And when we see them kind of hit that point where they're just kind of stagnant and nothing's happening, we got to push them. We got to push them a little bit. Say, okay, come on, let's see if you can do a little better. Let's get out there and serve. Let's do these things. We gotta be willing to use the relationship we're creating with the goal of being closer to Jesus. Well, we use that relationship to push them closer to Jesus. We encourage them for growth.